The Monterey Bay Poetry Consortium presents Simon Hunt and Edward Jarvis, recorded live via Zoom on Sunday, November 8th, 2020.
Okay, well, welcome to the 8th Monterey Bay Poetry Consortium Zoom-based reading as we continue, all of us, to shelter in here in place from the pandemic. And as we recover, all of us, from the stress and strain of not only the pandemic and being locked down in varying degrees, but the aftermath of the election, which was a long process. And as we brace ourselves for the coming 72 days between now and January 20th, who knows what's going to happen. And we need to just be cautious and wary. We can exhale, though, I think, and at least a certain hurdle has been cleared. For those of you who don't know, the Monterey Bay Poetry Consortium is an affiliation of poets in the Monterey Bay area and beyond. The consortium has been presenting readings monthly for years, many years, going back into the 90s, as a successor to the readings that were instituted by the former local chapter of the National Writers Union. And the dean and the founder of the consortium is John Lowy, whom most of you know was the local representative of the Writers Union in our area. We're on Facebook at Monterey Bay Poetry Consortium. If you'd like to like us, please do. Jennifer Legier and/or I will welcome you quickly. And that's where there's news such as we generated for the consortium. So I want to thank you all for being here virtually. And thank you for signing in so that we could take care of our Zoom housekeeping items. And now on to the afternoon. We are going to enjoy poetry from two outstanding and gifted poets who are making return visits with us. We have had them before when we were in physical locations, and it's wonderful to have them back. Simon Hunt and Ed Jarvis. Each of our poets will read for 20 to 25 minutes, and they are superb. Most of you, I suspect, know them and know their work and know that we're going to be in for a great afternoon. So if you've got your snacks and your cup of coffee or your glass of wine or whatever, sit back and enjoy an afternoon of really fine poetry. Our first poet is going to be Simon Hunt, who used to teach and live up here in the Monterey area. He's now in Las Vegas and teaching down there and writing, of course. He also serves, along with John Dotson and Jennifer and some others who are not with us today, as a host for these readings when we need to call on him. Simon's been down in Las Vegas for the last 3 years. He lived and taught and worked up here for 20 years. He's been a teacher for 30 years or so, predominantly at the high school level. Now teaching on middle school, I think, Simon, you said. Is that right? Yeah.
True.
Simon's work has been widely published in print and online journals, his poems. In 2018, his first collection of poems, Lesser Magi, came out. He also had his first play performed in 2019, Rerun. And I hope Rerun enjoys many reruns, Simon. And are you currently working on another play, or are you?
Nope. I'm working on a manuscript of poems plus one little play, which is exactly Rerun. So that's a volume that should come out sometime in 2021.
Oh, that's great. So that's on schedule to come out sometime next year. That's great. Simon was born in what is now Zimbabwe. It used to be called Rhodesia. He's lived in South Africa, the United Kingdom, as well as the USA during his childhood. He's the father of two, and he served the Robinson Jeffers Storehouse Foundation in Carmel as a trustee and as a volunteer guide for, 10 or more years. It was wild. Are you still doing that, Simon, from a distance or no?
No, not with any regularity, but I certainly want to stay affiliated with Tor House as I'm able.
Oh, that's great. And of course, with Elliot and all the good work that he's doing there. Well, thank you, Simon, for being with us. Ladies and gentlemen, relax, lean back. Simon, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for being here. I want to thank Bob in particular and John Lowy and everyone associated with the Monterey Bay Poetry Consortium. Like Bob said, I moved away about 3 years ago, and gosh, the country's been in incredible upheaval, and in some respects, my life has been in great upheaval. Some of you guys know about that. There will be some hints in the poems that I read, but it's just been absolutely wonderful as a kind of silver lining of this ridiculous pandemic to be back at these readings via Zoom and to read to this group again is very moving to me. So thank you, everyone. I want to start, I often like to start a reading by reading a poem by someone else. And so I'm going to do that today. This is a poem that's especially meaningful to me this weekend, and I think you'll see why. I love sonnets. I write sonnets a lot, although I've limited the number of sonnets I'm going to hit you with today. But I love sonnets, and this is a sonnet. It's a really famous sonnet. You know a few lines of this sonnet, but we don't often read the whole thing. It's the New Colossus by Emma Lazarus, which is engraved on the base of the Statue of Liberty. In fact, it was written as a fundraiser to create a base for the Statue of Liberty, which is an amazing thing to think about, poetry as a fundraiser. You know, poetry would make large numbers of people part with money. Great to consider. This is the New Colossus by Emma Lazarus, and not to telegraph it too much, but as Bob said, I was born in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, so I'm an immigrant to this country, an immigrant specifically from a country which our lame duck president, saints be praised, would have dismissed as a shithole. So in that light, the New Colossus by Emma Lazarus. Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep ancient lands your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. The wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Slightly naive, maybe, but on a good day, the country gets close, maybe. Here's a much darker sonnet of mine, and I'm going to follow the lead of my friend Ken Weisner, who read here a month or two ago, reading entirely new work. I do have a book available from Hummingbird Press. You can email me about that. I'll put that in the chat. It's called Lesser Magi. It's okay, and Christmas is a-coming. But I'm going to read entirely new stuff from the new manuscript today. So here's a sonnet of mine, a little darker than Emma Lazarus. This is called The Doors. Now here's that rage again, unseen for 30 years. What's brought this on? There's little wrong, a meal uneaten, towels hung back up dirty. He's screaming at his only grandson, strong but struggling through some adolescent strife. What is he really shouting for? Despair at growing old? Frustration with his wife, his third, who's ill but can't quit smoking? There. Now I'm 14 again. You little shit was always me, and not the brother whom in middle age I still avoid. A room can't hold one when the other enters it. My son and I pack up and go. We're damned. The doors are opened, closed, then opened, slammed. So when we were just arriving, Bob and I were talking about the weather a little bit. And I live in Las Vegas now. The weather about 7 months of the year is really fabulous. And about 4 or 5 months of the year is oppressively hot to me. And also I get tired. Having lived in Monterey for 20 years, I get tired of blue sky. So I have a friend at work named Dana, and I wrote this poem for her. It's called, because she loves clouds. It's called Clark County Clouds. I've lived months at a time in cloud, a London winter, the cold water, steel gray heritage of empire. Or Monterey, where sea fog shields my children from sun and dust. Or in the Celtic melancholy that is my birthright and glamorous friend. How strange then to live here, in an arid valley ringed by mountains and pressed down by uninterrupted blue. How valuable when one cloud wanders lonely as a Wordsworth overhead. When they mass to form a whole new sky and turn the red rocks black and brown. Here's a poem that's a little bit longer, a slightly goofy love poem, I guess you could say. It's in, let's see, rhyming 5-line stanzas for those keeping score. This is called Johnny Mathis, Me and You. Are we good on Johnny Mathis? Do we need a footnote on Johnny Mathis? No, okay. I'm looking at younger faces and they're saying we're cool. Johnny Mathis, Me and You. When I was very, very young, I heard somewhere that one man's voice could make a bra clasp come apart, regardless of which song he'd sung, like neither party had a choice. And though I could not understand the motive for the magic trick, it was easy to admire the art of working vocal sleight of hand to make a thing held fast unclick. A few years later, it was clear what riches such a skill might bring. And though I fumbled from the start, I hold some moments very dear. I learned back then I could not sing, but your voice left me feeling high that time I heard you in a bar. You sang your own song, Perfect Tart. You've had my love since then. Here's why I'm happiest when where you are. And we've been friends for decades now. Through marriages, through downs and ups, we've both made choices less than smart. We've asked each other why, when, and how, and drunk from one another's cups. And I have sought for years a way to charm you from your clothes with verse. I'm still the ass behind that cart. 2 ironies. That singer's gay. My poems go from sad to worse. Once this was going to be the rhyme to make you come to me at last. But I've no hex for bra or heart. No, I've got only words and time. Today, tomorrow, and the past. All we've ever really had, just time and lines you've never seen. Trite doggerel about love's dart. I warned you, I have got it bad. And chances are, what does that mean? Sorry, just paging through a manuscript. I'm almost with you. Okay, so my friend Heather Lancasera is here with us. She is the Clark County Poet Laureate for serving a 2-year term, and she's marvelous. But she once talked me into writing a pantoum a day for a week, which was a cruel trick. So I'm going to give you one of those pantoums, and it's actually about this object, which I'm holding up to the camera now. This is a rock I picked up at a place where my grandfather grew up called the Isle of Man, and I lost it and I couldn't find it. So here's a pantoum about that object. I took a stone from the point of air, where shingle meets the Irish Sea. I cannot find it anywhere. I miss the way it felt to be, where shingle meets the Irish Sea, the northern point of the Isle of Man. I miss the way it felt to me. That stone was perfect in my hand. The north half of the Isle of Man was my grandfather's home when young. His scalpel sat perfect in his hand, although the strokes had slowed his tongue. Once at grandfather's home, still young, I took stone from the point of air. It tasted salty on my tongue, but I cannot find it anywhere. I warned you there'd be a couple of sonnets, so there's a couple of sonnets coming now. I'm looking at tons of writers as I look at my screen, and I'm sure you guys have written loads of COVID-19 poems, and we're going to spend the next few years, once we get out of this mess, figuring out which ones are keepers and which ones are not. So here's two poems about the weirdness of the last several months, one for April 2020 and one for May 2020, two sonnets. April 2020. The Oriole in Bakersfield, at first, like you and me, seemed out of place. We'd come 250 miles apiece to pass our child one to the other. With that done, we stood around 6 feet apart and talked about the virus, social distance, birds, and weather. Awkward minutes, then went back to separate cars, one empty, one new filled. We hadn't known two kinds of orioles were native to the Central Valley. Males of each bright jewels, especially the bullocks. This was the other kind, the duller, hooded, but orange still, enough to be surprising. We spooked him from his perch and watched him rising. This one's even weirder. May 2020, saying uncle. May 2020, saying uncle. The eels in Japanese aquaria have grown depressed without their human friends. Their keepers hope that social media will see them through until the crisis ends. Meanwhile, the murder hornets head our way. A single one can kill a mouse with ease. In teams, they can take people down all day, as large as guilt, beheading honeybees. 6 feet apart, we stay avuncular, or try. What else is there to say or do in such a world? My two aunts' husbands were, bar none, the two best men I ever knew. I speak that word we say, then say again, who have no fathers, but who would be men. Bob, every single time I do a reading, I swear I'm going to watch the clock, and every single time I forget to do it. I have in mind to do 5 more short ones. Are we good?
Simon, you're in good shape. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Well, that's not on that page. So some kind of mistake there. Give me a second, you guys. Got it. So I've had this funny experience of trying to do poems in free verse lately, which has not been my writing mode for about 20 years. And some of them have been successful, some of them not so successful, of course. But a shocking number of them I finish without thinking about form at all, and bam, it's 14 lines. You know, so I've internalized sonnets to a debilitating extent. So one of these is a free verse poem that ended up 14 lines. And one of them is a blank verse sonnet, which means it doesn't rhyme. But I'll let you guys figure out which one is which. They're both kind of dark love poems in a way, I guess. This one is called Ineluctable. Ineluctable. The night we met, I dreamed of you, and you later said of me. How simple it might have been if one of us had stumbled. I had been drinking after all, and you were in your trouble heels. Either one might have caught the falling other. Our hands scrabbling at skin and clothes, I would have tried to kiss your tattoo. We might more innocently and sooner have done what we are doing now, each unbuttoning the clasp of a beautiful sack of disaster. And this next one is called Snakes. It's about snakes. Remember how you swam to me, your hair transformed to snakes, and splashed me where I sat with just my feet below the water, changed, refracted into something pale and lithe? Or how you coiled away, did not return, and disappeared? The smoky, pungent light inside that bar in Tortuguero, La Culebra, which the hotel called No Go. Do you recall that dream I never told to you that's haunted me for decades now? Ridiculous, but awful. One small snake is fed tail first into a sink's disposal. It shrieks as it is ground to blood and bone with a recognizably human voice. Wow, that one's pretty dark. I forgot how dark that one was. I'm making a game time decision. Let's stick with dark and then lighten up. Let's do that. 13. Very short poem. I got 2 poems with Monterey settings for you. This poem is set 17 years ago at the Monterey Sports Center, for anybody who's been there. Gravity. My daughter slipped beside a swimming pool. I watched her hit the tiles, fall in, go under. I walk her and her 2 black eyes to school. Our neighbors look from her to me and wonder. Okay, my pages are all out of order, but I'll be right with you guys for the last couple. 3 more poems. 4 more. Now I'm going to drop one, too dark. So we're going to go slightly lighter, dark, and wistful. That's the mood we're going to go for. Slightly lighter, dark, and wistful, and then we'll be done. This is At the Park. No, it's Kent, wasn't it? It was Kent who said Heather should keep giving me formal challenges. All right, this is another one. Came out of a challenge from Heather. At the Park. We've come to test out all our broken things. You ask me if I think it is too late to mend the fractures. Jazz, some argue, swings for real by jettisoning awkward freight like notes on paper. Reach for golden rings? No, maybe good will have to serve as great. Let's turn our collars to the heavy weather and make our way on limbs we've spliced together. And I'm going to finish up with 2 slightly longer poems, assuming I can find them, and I think I can. The first one, nope, there it is. The first one is called The Length of the Valley. And I told you I had a couple of Monterey County poems. So the valley in question is the Carmel Valley. So let's say this, where Bob is. I don't know if anybody else is in the Carmel Valley right now. The Length of the Valley. She knew the man one car ahead and also knew what brought him here. Official word of who was dead for families. Her growing fear stretched out again each time he passed a driveway on the winding highway up the valley. She'd gone to town in Jim's old truck. It smelled of him, and driving it, she liked to think might send him luck. She usually felt safe as shit, so high, so heavy, and so fast, above the blacktop of the 2 lanes through the valley. But now, behind the army jeep, her sense of safety slips away with river farms, and then the steep part and the slowly dying day. Her own place is the very last, just past where the jeep turns in, the hard end of the valley. I'm going to finish up with a kind of hero poem. I've been trying to write a poem for my beloved uncle for a long, long time. He's going to turn 92 this month. So this is a poem written for him last year. And in a sense, it took me 50 plus years to get it. Now, I don't think I wrote any poetry for my first 7 years or so. So let's say 45 years to write a poem for my uncle, because he's the best. And maybe some of that will come across in this poem. So it's a poem in free verse for my uncle, who will be turning 92 this month, and it's called Smith. That's his last name. Smith, Serena Road, Santa Barbara, 2019. The fire comes over the peak just after dark. It's November, but they come more often now. He sees the orange glow from the parking lot of the restaurant where he has eaten Mondays for 50 years. It's his 91st birthday. At home, the TV is on for fire updates, but his eyes are on the hill. Last month, he scattered there the ashes of his wife. Their marriage was long, childless, and joyful. He watches her cremated again. The neighbors call between 9 and 12 in case he is asleep. They all want him to leave with them, should it come to that. Say, to drive through smoke to the home of their grown child he held when she was born. He preps an evac box. He starts with photographs, himself newborn on Easter Island. His fur trader pals in the Arctic Circle. His parents and brother long ago at home in Stornoway. Kathleen at the beginning and at the end. Next, her false teeth, because what the hell do you do with those when you can't bear to throw them away? Then a pocket knife he bought, demobbed in Inverness in 1946, that he sharpens twice a year. The barbering tools he mastered on the Alberta oil fields, packed away for decades now. A man needs a way to earn a living. You just never know. The space that's left, he fills with clocks and watches. This neighborhood, the garden where he spends his days, the house, they can't be saved when the flames come to town, this time or the next. But there are hours of comfort in the taking apart and putting together. Some keep good time, some don't. So that's it for me today, and I just want to thank you all for sharing the afternoon with me.
Thank you, Simon. That was wonderful.
Terrific.
That was just excellent. And if anybody wants to unmute and say any words.
Terrific, Simon. Fantastic. Great work.
Thanks, Elliot. It's really good to see you.
And beautiful reading, too.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, Simon, it was great. I mean, to begin with a fundraiser, Emma Lazarus, and to wrap up with your uncle there in Santa Barbara, that was quite a tour. And I remember Johnny Mathis. I loved that you slipped into the last line or two of that poem the phrase "chances are," because I so remember that song. That took me back to 1960 when I used to listen to him. And the image of the inordinately blue sky pressing down on Las Vegas, it's so much what it's like. You capture things so well. And even though you've internalized the sonnet form, I think that's a good thing. Free verse or not. So thank you very much, Simon. It was wonderful to have you back. And as you say, you will post in the chat area how to get to Hummingbird Press for your book. Folks, I would urge you to follow up and go ahead and order a copy of Simon's book from Hummingbird Press. So thank you. Okay, well, now we're going to move to our next poet, Ed Jarvis, who has written and read for us before. Ed was born and raised on a ranch in the San Joaquin Valley, and his poetry reflects that. I don't know, Ed, if you'll be sharing some of those poems from out there with us, but Ed is well connected to his roots and growing up in the San Joaquin Valley. His poetry has appeared in numerous publications, including American Voice and Poetry Ireland Review. His first volume of poetry, Palimpsest, was published in 2001, and a second volume is soon to be published. And do you have an ETA for that, Ed, or is it still in process?
It's still in process.
Okay. And Ed also leads a rich and varied life, practicing chiropractic in Pacific Grove. We were talking before we all got together this afternoon, and he talked about the value of the work he does on his clients and how that helps them to maintain their equilibrium, their energy levels, and their health, and therefore their immune systems in the face of the pandemic that's going on around us. And that is a very important and a good thing to be doing. Thank you, Ed. So folks, let's lean back, relax some more. Ed, over to you.
Well, thank you, Bob. Thanks to you and John for inviting me back. Simon, you're a hard act to follow. Thank you all for being here. Starting out with a San Joaquin Valley poem. Snip. During the oppressive heat, the summer smelting of the San Joaquin, Snip lay soused in the shade of the house among roses, Double Delight, Fragrant Cloud, Sterling, the ranch dog, a toast-colored, short-haired, yellow-toothed, thick-necked hound who, in the scintillating afternoon bake, stayed fixed as a hunkered sphinx, chin resting on crossed paws, slitted eyes conspiring in garden wafts, following the dutiful flight of a facet-visioned honeybee that droned and bobbed in the weighted air through a world of ecstatic color until it flew within range, and, quicker than a half-blink, was translated with a snap into the maw of a black absolute. A second San Joaquin Valley poem. Cindy, a cat. Winter wind blew its stinging breath through the gaping barn door, rearranging strands of scattered straw on the compacted earthen floor. Two horses, the goats, a sheep stood stiffly in the frigid dawn, spectral exhalations rising from the stalls. In a corner manger, a feral cat had birthed her litter, 6, maybe 7, it was long ago, newborn kittens huddled for warmth in the hay. My younger sister and I, we both children, lifted the gray one from the others, took her to the house to show mother, who told us to take the kitten back, that it was best. The next day, we stole in to check on the new life, unable to resist. They were gone, all but the one we had touched, our scent a condemnation. We raised her on goat's milk from a doll's bottle, she who would bring a long feline life of silent presence, undemonstrative love, witness to 2 children's transformation, and in my old age, both she and my sister long gone, her example of meeting the day in its changes, not to arrange, fix, or clarify, and especially now, to gather what memory would hoard to complete the picture, a part of the evening, like the ebbing light. The gathering. The sun's ember is yet smeared in pre-dawn's chilled hearth. The night brought visitations, my dead, bearing no marks of sadness, their silence closing in. Far away a dog barked, heralding their appointment. If it were translated as music, it would be the skirl of a pibroch from a distant hill, the clan gathering to anoint my mortality. As if for departure. An air of waiting, as if for departure, as fire sweeps over summer-worried terrain. Forests turn to ash, falling like snowflakes. The augury of circling buzzards remain too obscure in the soot-thickened sky. In the north, the east, in the south. To the west, the ocean is rising, outpacing the slow meander of the clock. People hunker down, faces masked below brows with furrows deep as heavily trekked trails. Disguised, they hope for an anonymity as the dark one tries on different costumes. Fire, water, pestilence invisible as unassembled atoms. List in hand, roaming freelance. These nights we could wait for the easing, Mars and Pluto going their separate ways, pretend not to care. Or we could, as if for the last time, touch whatever is at hand. The return. Next month I'll return, Father, to where 30 years ago I scattered you to the mad rush of the Kauai, where it thinned to a white line in its descent. I'll be the age you were then. Loss tunes the body, tightens like a string its sinews, the voice bound to a single note only a bone in the wind could sound. I know a place for rebirth, where grandmother of the mountain was turned into a tree. I'll nestle my back into her, howl you there. Stones. A makeshift shrine, a copper bowl set atop the wood stove, filled with stones from snow streams feeding the lake, defining the ancestral place of origin, giving us our familial name, unanglicized for the foreign ear, Isujärvi. Also, stones light sifted in the middle fork of the Kauai, where I sluiced your ashes, Father, gathered from there, placed with the others, heated in the solemn space within the sauna, place of rebirth, water ladled, anointing them, the steam sibilant chorus, your voice rising with theirs, your Father, his before him, the ancient song, inside the stones, the world is beginning again. Still on the same subject, the stone. Within this stone taken from an ice-locked lake resides an untouchable darkness needing neither air nor light, a single note shaping its geometry where the earth is beginning again, sure of itself, a subliminal hum from which we listen, for which we try to shape words, words birthed from longing, ritual words for the journey. The ascent. I have escaped the smoke-smudged atmosphere enveloping my home on the coast, fire raging at a brief distance to the north, the east, to the south, the spawn of storm, its emphatic fingers of lightning. My middle-aged daughter has recently settled into my house, bringing the storm of her life, chooses to remain in the thickened air. Above the summer swelter of the San Joaquin, now climbing the western slope of the Sierra Nevada, I rise over a once scorched landscape. Blackened trees, stark against the deeply azure sky, center the steep slope renewed with blooms of yellow sage blossoms. Along the roadside, wild sweet pea, what I called her then. La Bruja, Jalapa, Mexico. An old woman plucks thorns from paddle-shaped leaves of nopales destined for her pan, sits cross-legged at her lintel, her brittle bones bent to the task. Occasionally she glances up at one who passes, revealing it two ravens perched beneath her parchment lids, slowly pulls a thorn, a corner of her sunken mouth slightly rising. A corona, imperceptible flash, envelops the one now ascending the worn stone steps to the plaza, his feet breaking stride, a little jink, as he tosses a backward puzzled glance, a sudden wind scattering jacaranda blossoms over him, as though the sky were falling. El Niño del Mercado, Jalapa, Mexico. At a stall in the mercado, a boy, 8, maybe 9, sits on a stool holding a honed blade, slitting husks, opening ears of corn, and with a flashing arc he lops each stem. Black Aztec eyes regard me, assessing a foreigner, the ritual skill of an ancient priestly line on his hands. The earth here is volcanic, tinted red, and many walls are painted so. Local memory is a reflex, goes quietly about its business. El Recuerdo, Jalapa, Mexico. I have been watching him, the old man hanging wash on the flat roof across the way. It is how they do it here. He moves slowly, soaking the Jalapa sun into his bones, as it likewise absorbs from the sheets, the socks, the shirt he has just lifted, as pinned to the line. His back hunches to the warmth. I see him linger, holding the smooth feel of his wife's undergarment before presenting them up, an offering to the old god and to memory, for the warmth there also. Epona. Shedding her nocturnal sleep stance under moon glow, she gathered herself from dream time in the dawnlight, willing now to let gravity touch her hooves, galloped circles around me in the open field, closing in as though I were the center of gravity in her cosmos. I had trained her to respond to knee taps, the songs of command. No bridle, not even a hackamore need violate the chiseled nobility of her head. She would come and I mount, then a blast of speed into the fireworks of first sun, her mane black as shadow flying like a banner behind her extended crown, her golden coat sweat slick and shining like gilded armor. Epona, the horse goddess, and I gripping fire between my thighs. The god in the blackberries. That poor small creature with a devil for a soul let me lead him to the field where wild blackberries swelled in the hot summer to something near sacred. And so I spent the day filling a gunny sack, made the sacrifice of rasped hands, neck and back scorched to an exquisite pain. When the sun finally flung its last angry glance from the horizon, I lashed the load to the donkey's back. He stood rigid, blinked once, then suddenly tipped forward on bulbous knees and rolled over like a skiff caught in a wave. Writhing on his back, he kicked his legs in the air, wrath-filled and jubilant, leapt up, swaggered into a new stance, the oozing sack flat and futile, a purple stain covering him like a robe, he, a high priest of defiance. I let my grip loosen on the imaginary pistol I had just used to kill him and stood in awe before this god who would present himself from an eventual pantheon, sharp-hooved, objectus ex inferis, and unrepentant. The valley floor. Here there is quiet endurance, another winter's privation, drought. The rivers flow low, shallow patches of snow scattered in shade. Yosemite Valley. Its indigenous inhabitants were forcibly removed beyond long memory. Granite walls frame a fretwork of shadows as the sun creeps inevitably westward. Inside the Native American Museum beside the Visitor Center, among tightly woven baskets, beaded buckskin dresses, in a dark display corner a man sits, demonstrates snapping an arrowhead from a fist of flint. We chat. He descends from 2 non-local tribes I've not heard of. After a few words, we are silent. Listen to the faint sound of his chipping, as for voice from the back of dark trunks of trees, an ancient weeping song. Outside, a raven perches on a low cedar branch. Some say his raspy throat rattle is an ill omen. But I want to welcome him into our enclosure, blue-black shaman whose chant is remembrance, could pull the height of earth back, his breath a quickening over forgotten bones. Yosemite Valley. A short distance from the well-worn track used by upward-gazing tourists awed by impossible walls of granite cliffs, the cemetery is a quiet aside beneath ancient trees. In a far corner, segregated from carved gravestones with their Scottish, German, and English names worn by time and weather to shallow suggestions, is the earth where the local Indians were lain. Rows of simple crosses, painted rusty red, the weathered hue of their race. I pause before one, a boy, written on its abbreviated crosspiece. The raven eyeing me from within the cedar above grinds her cackles and coos, wants me to hear the lost one's name. Scene from Point Joe. This was told to me by one of my patients who is a whale watching boat captain. Scene from Point Joe. With the extravagant depth of the marine trench beneath them, darkness wells up near the surface. Their earnest shrieks can be heard the distance, 20 maneuvering orcas fierce at the hunt. She pulls her teat from the calf's mouth with a quick roll, her fluke inadequate to shield his length. Migrants, the gray whales must run the risk twice each year. She has lagged, slowed by motherhood, has been absent for days from the pod. Now the drum of her great heart quickens. They are close, their sleek black-white mottle bearing fist-sized teeth. They will wedge the suckling from her side, drown him before severing her flukes, feeding on her helpless bulk in turn. But nearby 3 humpbacks, as though at vigil here, heaving their massive tails, are propelled to her aid. The orcas now won't engage, are thwarted by a distance beyond Point Joe, beyond tribe, beyond symmetry of kind. Convent Chapel, Monastery Beach. You could wait for the place to empty of ceremony, creep in and sit enfolded by the silence, having left every belief on the steps outside. Wait for the lengthening light to ignite the window as though its colors, crimson, cobalt, gold, were the prayers you could hold, then, with the sun set free. Sedona Dawn. This is referring to Sedona, Arizona. The eye of God has awakened. Time begins as the flaming orb glares an ochre vision over the void. It becomes firmament, a rubric of cliffs, jagged crags. A creek comes to light, rushes into daybreak. The sky is a chameleon, assumes now an azure skin. Then a tree, jubilant, is consecrated to a ritual of wind. In its branches a raven, a red-tailed hawk wait from absence to take first flight. The farewell to Dad. My father, my adopted father, my dad who raised me, left the Upper Peninsula of Michigan at age 15. He was orphaned at 5, and he left the Upper Peninsula of Michigan at age 15 and rode the rails to the San Joaquin Valley. The farewell to Dad. 3 months we have had since we stood together beside the tracks where you, the orphan boy expelled from school, turned your back on Michigan and lost. As smoke hemorrhaged in the cold eastern sky and the freight train neared, your friend Eddie put his hand on your shoulder and told you he couldn't go. Typically, you gave him a what the hell glance as your arm hooked the iron ladder of a boxcar as it swung you up. So now I stand beside you in the cardiac unit, you the adventurer, the weight of oncoming circumstance charging the air. I hold this, your last glance as the monitor makes its pronouncement and goes as flat as the far-off San Joaquin you had headed for years ago. Eddie, once again touching your shoulder for the journey, for luck, as friends do. Lost Tribe. I was named after my dad's father, who my name is in translation from the original Finnish, for Edvarti Isojärvi. Theirs was the old country dialect from the region of Isojärvi. They had left the mines there for a life in America, the Upper Peninsula, where they settled among their talismans, birches, lakes, frozen winters, the soulless soliloquy of a copper mine. For them, the sun did not shine in the season of short days. So early the work began. So late they were up from the hole. Sundays it glowered anemically through the Lutheran stained glass, as brittle as their dream. Their shadows swallowed them, as did the earth, collectively when a timber gave or a charge went wrong, or individually, each into his own pit, as was Isojärvi, whose lungs ceased in the dimly lit shriveled air, he only 24. His father Juho, the others, their women whose hair went as white as the winter landscape by 35 and smelled of pasty, baked bread, hands stained and coarse cracked from midwifing the last potatoes out of autumn earth, folded under their breasts too often at the shaft waiting word, a name until there was none to wait for, to ask after, to recall in the white erasure that was winter. The birches he planted. How am I doing on time, Bob?
You're doing fine, Ed. You've got, at least 10 minutes. Yeah, you're doing well.
The birches he planted. The birches he planted are losing their leaves. The wind is from the north and cold. He has asked me to come. We sit at the table and he reminds me he was not home much when I was a boy. I notice new distances in his eyes. His breathing is labored, but the granite facade endures. We talk of the sauna I will build, mindful of the ritual, the proper stove, wood. It must burn wood. He sculpts the word, giwas, giving it shape with his breath. Pierola would know where to get one. He repeats the word, giwas. The old tongue is easier now. Minna rakastansinua. I love you too, Papa. There's an ancient silence around us. I'm entering his forest. The toast, fire of transformation. He looks at me across the table, littered with photos my father has brought. They have been speaking a language I can only partially assemble. Dad is a stranger here, having left on a boxcar at age 15, not returning until now. Old Uncle Alfred is the last to remain of that vanished world. He glares, studies me, the adopted son, scans my non-finished features, says something to my father in the rhythmic first syllable emphasis of that tongue as they attempt to retie a bond that unraveled well over half a century ago. Something else is said between them. There's silence. It lingers. And then the old miner's permanently cupped hand raises his glass. Oliver, tervidexi. I raise mine. Swallow. Communion. Every year I make a pilgrimage to an isolated spot in the Eastern Sierra where I regather my soul from the year's adventures. And I like to sit on a log that crosses the creek there and watch the swirling water of the creek below me. But this happened one time. Communion. Sitting on a log bridging the creek, beholding spirals of current passing beneath my dangling feet, I hear what sounds like a kiss. On the opposite end of the fallen tree sits a young chipmunk. I pucker, suck, mimic his sound. Once. He answers. Once. I give him two. He answers with two. I repeat. He responds. I offer three. He gives me three. We speak a transcendent language, a dialect, a proximity. Then the frantic, scolding mother appears, chases him to safety as though I were a stranger. Rib for Nathan. Nathan is my grandson. The coyote rib is broken, halved and no more than the length of a palm and open-fingered hand. It contained 1,000 breaths. I found it in the shallows of a Sierra stream, meat bleached away. Where there was marrow, a hollow straw. Holding it, a ceremony of howls is loosed as the wind, giving voice to aspen, a whisper to firs, this cold bite to my stubbled face. The hike for Nathan and Benjamin. After a summer of lethargy, both of my teenage grandsons attempted to beg off when I suggested a hike up a steep mountain above a Pacific, the color of fierce Odin's one good eye. I insisted. There is that which looms. We climbed in the bright early light. One tramped close behind as I set the pace, steady in the ascent. The other double timed short distances ahead, returned to tell what lay before us. Hours later, we paused at the summit, caught our breath, took note of the eagle flying above us, two ravens, a buzzard circling below, the broad expanse of distant horizon. By an alternative route, we began the long descent, steep, precarious. It resulted in slips, falls, strained muscles, torn skin. Eventually, in the deep cleft of the valley, at the mountain's base, a darkly carapaced stream would guide us back to where we began. It was in the downward trek that they would find their footing, and in the hushed eulalia of the flowing water themselves. Yet, it will be years before they understand. The word for Benjamin. Benjamin is my younger grandson. It was slurred at first, slow and muffled under his breath. I listened to the repetitive beat of a rap song chanted by my grandson. He, a sparkly-eyed 9-year-old, a trickster by proclivity, so I understood what this was about. The airing of the F word, firing for effect the fast-flying fricative with its gratifying glottal stop, and so made no comment. The volume, of course, went up, and the word inserted randomly for emphasis. It, the word, has in my lifetime gone from taboo unutterable to ubiquitous banality, from exclamation to subject, object, verb, noun, adjective, adverb. I pointed this out to him and suggested that F words fruit, flower, and Freemason carried about as much impact these days, but offered that it might be more effective to lend it gravitas by saying it in Latin, futuo, more in keeping, I thought to myself, with the sound of prayer, which in its way, at moments, it has been. The Mark, another San Joaquin Valley poem. On that morning, the hog didn't rush from his wood-planked hooch to the trough when I left the house at dawn with his tub of slops. He scooched as far into his shallow depths as he could, his corkscrew impaled rumps toward me, until Dad and Cooper came with a rope to loop his hind leg, drag him out, his piercing squeals folding down the ears of nearby horses, goats, sending the chickens to their roost to hunker, their necks tucked like turtles, then to deftly slit a crimson smile into his throat, catching the splashing flood in a bucket for blood sausage. And I, who had raised him, he who had followed me on my round of chores and into the kitchen for a clandestine snack, had listened to my musings, confessions, now lay kicking his reluctant way out of life while I stood stained with Cain's indelible mark. Lazarus of Drum Street, San Francisco. Looking down from a hotel window across the street, I thought he might be dead. The body curled on its side, covered with a striped beach towel, bare feet sticking out, shoes pillowing the unseen head, a bent walker tipped on its side beside him as darkness recedes slowly in the early morning cold and the sun becomes a widening beam at street's end. But lo, he is resurrected from the death that he had trespassed, pulls the shroud from his face, struggles to both knees, head bowed as if in prayer, pees into an empty Coke bottle, then hoists himself up, squirms his feet halfway into the shoes, pushes the walker ahead, dragging one leg, pauses to busk a young passing woman who looks up from her texting, stops, opens her purse and hands him a bill, gives him a high five and continues on, but then returns to gift him another. He then staggers on down the sidewalk, a few stiff paces, a pause, a few more where near the entrance to a bar, he stoops to pick up a butt, lights it, sweet smell of morning, amazing grace, O ghost of jubilation, and he slouches penance toward the light of day. The protectors. We sit in silence, my grandson and me, as the flames of our small campfire shiver in the November cold. Then he mentions 2 of his friends are joining the military. I know what he's telling me. I remain silent, note the shadows loitering between the trees. The specters return from when at his age I was a Marine. I reveal those that I think might calm the testosterone madness that overtakes those his age. Leave others unnamed, their presence difficult to bear. He now avoids my eyes, studies the pulsing embers. The full moon casts a protective maternal glow over his sparsely bearded face as he stalks an inflated Mars across the southern sky. U.S. Marine Base 29 Palms. What stays with me is the August heat, the breath-sucking intensity of it, wind whipping the desert sand into a dense curtain in which shadow figures disappear as though swallowed, moving slowly forward, squinting into the unseen, specters condemned, the steel hulk idling nearby, its engine growling, rasping a death song, the barrel of its gun projecting like the unsated phallus of Beelzebub, these now unidentifiable shapes dissolving into the wind's useless equilibrium, its chastening blast, not a Lazarus among them. And my last. Sunrise on the bay. Dawn is a blur of elements where the shore angles sharply to the bay. I have come to the beatitude of presence. In the east, above low coastal hills, the sky has filled with pale rose petals scattered to welcome the arrival of this day's sun king. I watch an otter, lively flotsam, bob, dive, bob once again on the rhythmic surface of swells, an ardent abalone gatherer. Resting on an ancient midden, 1,000-year-old fragments of olone cast-off shells lie scattered around me like glistening shards of fallen stars. I select one, place it in my upturned palm, the otter in me gaining sustenance from such, from plundered depths, from seafloor and spirit whisper. I am a vessel bristling. I'm a vessel brimming. I am living beyond my means.
Thank you, Ed. That was wonderful. Just
Thank you.
great. You truly are a California poet, and that's in a very high form of praise. I mean, you took us amazing places. I'm intrigued by that donkey. It deliberately knew it was going to crush those blackberries.
Well, the son of a bitch evidently did, yes.
Yeah, amazing. And did it pull that stunt more than once?
No, that was it. That was it for the donkey and the berry track.
Oh, excellent. Well, I love your imagery. You know, the jacaranda flowers descending like the sky, and the story of the orca stalking the mother and her calf, and they're being rescued. It just is amazing. And the line you had in another poem about the weight of oncoming circumstance charging the air. So well said. And then you had up there in the Upper Peninsula, the women with their white hair midwifing the last of the potatoes. It's a wonderful way to say things, Ed. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. And the Cahuilla Canyon, I've spent a fair bit of time up in there. That's a marvelous part of the Sierra.
And Dad had asked me to take his ashes up there and put it in his favorite fishing hole before he died.
So great, so great. And isn't that the canyon way up at the head? Is that?
Yeah, it's a you follow the river up from Hospital Rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's that grove of sequoia up there, where they had that big cabin that was once the park headquarters, or is that another?
No. The sequoia forest, you go farther up to the left up the highway there, but from Medicine Rock, there's a dirt road from Medicine Rock that you follow the river up, the creek up. Well, I guess they call it a river.
Yeah, Cahuilla River.
At that point, it's a creek.
Yeah,
but,
right. That's a magnificent part of the Sierra. It really is. Thank you for taking us there.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Well, folks, thank you all for being with us this afternoon. This has been just a terrific afternoon of reading, and a nice way to return to a rich sense of being centered and normal in the wake of these past several days. We thank both of our poets, Simon and Ed, and Simon's guest there also. We thank you all for being here. Our next gathering will be on December 13th, again via Zoom. Charles.
This is Millie, but don't thank her. She's kind of a dick.
Okay, Millie. Well, be good to Simon, Millie, because if you want to eat, you got to pay your dues.
Right.
Yeah. So we'll have Chuck Atkinson, who's with us still here, and JP Dancing Bear will be our two poets reading next month. In the meantime, please stay tuned via Monterey Bay Poetry Consortium on Facebook. And if you'd ever like to contact John Lowy, you could do so. Let me know, and we can give you his phone number. And also do take a look at the website for Old Capitol Books. They sponsor with us, and they're a marvelous resource here in our community. So thank you again for being with us. It's been a terrific afternoon, and now we can be a little bit more alive and centered and healthy